Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today with Hashem Daf Nun Ches Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Netillas Yadayim, and we pick up today, we pick up today on Nun Ches Amid Beis on the very, very top line. I think I might have to repeat a couple of words from the end of Nun Ches Amid Aleph. I see there's one Mishnah Berurah that we didn't do. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Mem Daled, but we're picking up in Siman Kuf Samach Beis, really in the middle of Sif Daled. Sif Daled is a very lengthy Sif. Now, really, the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah that we're going to learn today, there really isn't that much in the way of chidush over what we've learned over the past couple of days, specifically really yesterday. It's really just a question of continuing to do the math of Netillas Yadayim and going through the different scenarios and figuring out what happens and what we need to be concerned about when it comes to the question of transferring tumah from one hand to the other. So to recap, yesterday, from the beginning of Sif Daled, what the Mechaber really discussed is that very question, the problem of transferring tumah from one hand to the other. And the case that the Mechaber was discussing was, what happens if you pour mayim rishonim on one hand? So let's say you go to wash the Netillas Yadayim, you pick up the kais for the Netillas Yadayim, you pour mayim rishonim onto your right hand. When you pour mayim rishonim onto your right hand, the tumah comes off the right hand, but now the tumah is in the water on the right hand. Now what happens if you take your right hand and you touch your left hand? Now, at first glance, you might think, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? The left hand is not washed yet. So the left hand is tumah. Stam Yadayim are shniim. So the left hand is tumah. So what's the big deal? I took the right hand that has mayim harishonim that are tumah, and I touched it to my left hand. So what? My left hand is already tumah. What's the big deal? But we saw that it is a big deal. Why? Because what happens now? You have mayim harishonim on your right hand that are tumah. You go ahead and you touch your left hand. What you're doing is you're transferring the tumah from the mayim harishonim of your right hand to the left hand. Now, the tumah that was already on the left hand, because the left hand is a stam yadayim, it's unwashed, so it has tumah. That tumah is, so to speak, native or natural to the left hand. It comes from the left hand. It is the tumah of the left hand. But when you take your right hand that has tamei mayim harishonim on it and you touch it to the left hand, what you're doing is you're taking right hand tumah and you're putting it onto the left hand. And that is a critical difference. Why? And this is one of the yesodos, one of the pillars that we need to fix in our minds to understand all of these halachas that we're going through. The problem is that when you have left hand tumah on the left hand, you could remove it by pouring water onto it. You pour mayim harishonim onto it, it'll take the tumah off the hand. You pour mayim shniim, the mayim shniim will be matar the mayim harishonim. But when you take tumah from the right hand and you put that tumah onto the left hand, when you take mayim harishonim from the right hand, that's tameh from the right hand, and you take that mayim and you transfer it to the left hand, so that now you have mayim harishonim that are tameh from the right hand on the left hand. Now you could pour 10 gallons of water on your hand, it won't accomplish anything. Why? Because the mayim shniim or mayim harishonim, it could only be matar the tumah that came from that hand itself. It cannot be matar tumah that came mimokam acher. So that's really the basis for this whole concern of touching the hands together in the middle of performing Netillas Yadayim. Now, you can understand that you've created a problem for both hands. Because again, like I like to say, let's do the math. You poured mayim rishonim on the right hand. The right hand is tar, but the mayim rishonim on the right hand are tumah. You took the mayim rishonim that are tumah on the right hand, you put it on the left hand. Now, the only way to be matar the left hand is going to be to dry the left hand. So you remove that mayim rishonim from the left hand and start over again. So you must dry the left hand. But guess what? You also have to dry the right hand. Why? Because when you took the right hand that was wet and you touched it to the left hand, the mayim rishonim that were on the right hand picked up tumah from the unwashed left hand. So now the right hand has the same problem as the left hand. The right hand originally was tahar, but it had mayim rishonim on it that were tameh from the right hand. That you could take care of by pouring mayim shneim onto the right hand. That would be matayar the mayim rishonim. But now that the wet right hand touched the left hand, now the mayim on the right hand picked up additional tumah from the left hand. But that's left hand tumah, not right hand tumah. So now if you try to pour mayim shneim on the right hand, it's not going to do anything. Because the mayim shneim that you're pouring on the right hand cannot be mitaher the mayim rishonim that contain left hand tumah. So you must dry the right hand as well. So basically, in a nutshell, if you poured mayim rishonim on the right hand and then you touched it to the left hand, you must now dry both hands and start Netillas Yadayim all over again. That was the concern that the Mechaber gave us in the beginning of Sif Daled on Nun Ches Amud Aleph. Now, because of this concern, what the Mechaber did was, the Mechaber told us that there are 3 practical eitzes to negate this concern that you might go ahead and touch the 2 hands together during the Netillas Yadayim. Now, I mean, of course, you could just be very careful and make sure that it doesn't happen. But the Mechaber said, listen, it's very possible that during the Netillas Yadayim, the hands will come into contact with each other. So the Mechaber said there are 3 eitzes to negate this issue. What were his 3 eitzes? The first eitzah requires the help of an additional person. The first eitzah was, hold out your 2 hands and let somebody else take a keli and pour a revius bebasachas, a revius of mayim, on both of your hands. In that case, the Mechaber says, in that case, we have no problem at all. And the Mishnah Berurah nice cut and lamed test explained the reason you don't have any problem is because in that case, since both hands are being washed at one time, we look at them as one hand. Now, when you wash one hand, are we concerned that you're going to start pouring the water? Maybe the water will go on the thumb and then on the forefinger, and then 2 fingers will touch each other and transfer tumah from one finger to the other? No. One hand during one Netillas Yadayim, we're not concerned about the hand transferring tumah from one part of the hand to the other. So to explain the Mishnah Berurah, if you stick out your hands and somebody pours a revius of mayim on both of your hands, we're not concerned that during this process you might touch the hands together and transfer tumah from one hand to the next. Once the washing is done, once the individual pours a full revius of mayim on both of your hands, now both of your hands are fully tar. Now there's no tumah on either hand, and there's no tumah in the mayim either. In this case, you don't even need mayim shneim. Since both hands were washed with a full revius, the tumah's gone. The tumah vanished, or like we like to say in this shiur, the tumah went poof. So the tumah's gone, so now there's no concern if you touch the hands together. So that was eitzah number 1. Eitzah number 1, have somebody else pour a full revius on both of your hands. Eitzah number 2, the Mechaber said, if you don't have somebody else to help you out, Eitzah number 2 was that you yourself should take the keli. And again, practically, I'm not sure how you do this, I have to say. But the way the Mechaber describes it is, he says, take the keli, beroshe etzba'osav, with your fingertips, and then somehow pour the water from the keli onto both of your hands at one time. Okay, why does that help? So first of all, again, you're using a full revius, so once you finish the pour, your hands are completely tar. The mayim is tar. You don't need mayim shniyim because you used the revius. So certainly after you do the washing, it's okay if you touch your hands together. Even while you're doing the washing, it's okay if you touch your hands together. Because again, in this case, just like in the first eitzah, you're washing both hands bebasachas at one time. Since you're washing both hands at one time, we consider them both as one hand, and it's okay if they touch each other during the washing. And then finally, the Mechaber gave us eitzah number 3. Eitzah number 3 is the eitzah really that we are the most familiar with, and that is wash the right hand with a full revius, and then wash the second hand with a full revius. Now, this eitzah is not really quite as powerful or quite as effective as either of the first eitzahs. Why? Because over here what you're doing is you're pouring a full revius onto the right hand. Okay, you pour a full revius onto the right hand is completely tar, and the mayim that's on the right hand is also completely tar. But you still have a risk. The risk is, at this point, it's true that your right hand is fully tar, and the mayim on the right hand is fully tar, but you do have a risk. What happens in this case if you touch the right hand to the left hand? The water on the right hand could pick up tumah from the left hand. The left hand is Netillas Yadayim, it's an unwashed hand. So in that case, l'chayra, the right hand could pick up tumah from the left hand, which would be problematic, and it would require you to dry off the right hand, and I think dry off the left hand as well, because whatever wet, no, that maybe not. Maybe not. But it would require you to dry off l'chayra the right hand. So that doesn't seem to be quite as powerful an eitzah. I just should check one thing. Yeah. L'chayra, what I'm saying is true. So the third eitzah is not quite as good an eitzah as the first two eitzahs, but those are the three eitzahs that the Mechaber gave us, and that's the explanation of how they work according to the Mishnah Berurah. Now, let's go down on Nun Ches Amud Aleph. Let's go to the second line from the bottom, near the end of the line, right by the Ois Cut Mem Gimel for the Mishnah Berurah, the words V'achar kach yeshav shefem. I'd just like to mention that the learning of today's shiur should be a schus refuah shalema for Meir B'chai Sarah, who needs rachamei shamayim, and of course our Torah learning and all of our tefillos and all of our tilim and all of our thoughts go out to everyone, Achenu kol beis Yisrael b'chol makom shehem, especially the ones that are mamish in harm's way, especially the ones that are mamish behind enemy lines. Our thoughts and our tefillos go out to them, and our learning should be a schus to protect them. Let's remember, Eila barechev ve'eila basusim va'anachtu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu nazkir. Okay, so the Mechaber said, in all of these cases, whether you had somebody pour a revius on both of your hands at once, or whether you figured out how to pour a revius at once over both of your hands on your own, or you washed each hand with the revius one after the other, you washed the right hand with the revius and then the left hand with the revius. In all of those cases, says the Mechaber, va'achakach yeshav shefem. And then you could go ahead and you could wipe the two hands together. Ois Katan Mem Gimel, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'achakach yeshav shefem, al kol analkoi. The Mechaber is going back on all three practical eitzes that he gave you. In all three, if you follow any one of those eitzes, after the Netillas Yadayim is complete, you could touch one hand to the other. There's no tumah anymore. There's no concern anymore. Or it's in any of these cases, su ein chashash kilkel al yedei shifshuf. There's no concern anymore. I think what the Chavetz Chaim is coming to say is when the Mechaber says va'achakach yeshav shefem, he's not instructing you that when you finish the Netillas Yadayim you should wash your hands together. He's telling you there's no chash if you do so. If you do so, you're not going to create a problem. And the Mechaber on the bottom line here, the Chesam and Aleph, explains why. Because any time you wash your hand with a complete revius, me'ikar adin, you don't even need mayim shniyim. Once you wash with a full revius, me'ikar adin, you don't need mayim shniyim, because even the mayim rishonim that remains on your hand, they contain no tumah. You wash with a revius, the tumah vanishes. And in all three of these eitzes that the Mechaber gave you, you're washing with a full revius. So once the Netillas Yadayim is done on both hands, you can touch the hands together, and there's no concern at all. And the Mechaber continues, and he says, why is it? Why? Explains the Mechaber, because the Chazal gave a koyach. When you wash with a revius, they gave it the same koyach as a mikveh. They gave it the same koyach as tefillah, as tefillas yadayim. Now we know that by a mikveh, when somebody's tumah and he goes to the mikveh, he doesn't transfer the tumah from his body into the mikveh water. Like I keep on saying, you don't have to drain the mikveh between each person that goes to the mikveh. The tumah doesn't go into the mikveh water. So too, when you wash with the revius, the tumah from the yadayim does not go into the Netillas Yadayim water. Turning to the Chesam and Beis, she'ena tzricha shtifa shtei pamim, and that's why you don't need to wash twice when you wash with the revius. Going back to the Chesam and Aleph, B'shtorah's Katan Mem Dalet sha'shoifech, Ritzayder Loimer, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Val Yidei Zed Nigmura Kol Taras of Yadayim. So by any one of these three eitzes, by the time you finish the washing, your hands are completely tar, and so is any remnants of water that are on the hands, they're also completely tar. And now there's no longer any concern if the hands come into contact with each other. Now, here on the top line of the Chesam and Beis, the Mechaber really continues along the same theme of the concern of transferring tumah from one hand to another, and as we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah, even the question of transferring tumah from an object to the hands. So continues the Mechaber, top line in Ches Amud Beis, right by the Ois Katan Mem Hey for the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mechaber, Im naga bohem acher shaloi notal yadav, ba'oidon lachos min hamayim. Let's say you went ahead and you washed Netillas Yadayim, and you washed a perfect and a complete Netillas Yadayim. So you washed mayim rishonim and mayim shniyim on your right hand, then you washed mayim rishonim and mayim shniyim on your left hand. At this point, both of your hands are completely tahar, and the mayim that's on your hands is all completely tahar. You've already watched mayim shniyim. Says the Mechaber, in such a case, what happens if now, im naga behem acher shaloi natal yadav, another person comes along, shalom aleichem, and he shakes your hands, or he touches your hands, ba'oidon lachos min hamayim, while your hands are still wet. So you washed mayim rishonim and mayim shtiyim, but you didn't dry your hands yet. And now somebody came and touched your hands. What happens now? Says the Mechaber, tzarich lenagvam, you need to dry your hands, v'lachzor v'litel, and do over. You got to wash the Netillas Yadayim over again. Why? Do the math. Says the Mechaber, Sha'arei zeh timam al yedei hamayim she'aleim. Because this person who has unwashed hands just came and he transferred tumah from his hands onto the water that's on your hands. And then the water made your hands tameh. Now let's remember how great a problem this is. This is not native tumah. This is not tumah that came from your hands. This is tumah haba mimakam acher. Your hands were completely tar. The water on your hands were completely tar. Now this fellow came and he touched your hands. He's transferring tumah from his hands onto the water that's on your hands. Now, like we've said before, even if you pour 10 gallons of water onto each hand, you can't be matahar that tumah, because that's tumah haba mimakam acher. So what do you need to do? You need to dry your hands. You need to dry your hands and start all over again. So again, im naga behem acher sheloi natal yadav ba'oidad lachis ben hamayim tzarich lenagvam v'lachzev v'litoil. You need to dry your hands and do over. You got to wash Netillas Yadayim again. Why? Sha'arei zeh timam, because this person who touched your hands was mitame your hands al yedei hamayim she'aleim, through the agency of the water that's on your hands. He touched your hands while they're still wet. So he was mitame the mayim, and the mayim were mitame your hands. So you got to dry it, and you got to start all over again. Says the Mishnah, cut my memhei. Im naga bohem. Says the Mishnah, and this is true, like I spoke out. This is true even though you already washed mayim shneim. So your hands and the water on your hands are completely tar. Or even if you washed your hands with a full revius babasakas, shekvar nitaru yadav legamri, so that your hands and the water were all completely tar. Kevin shenaga behem acher sheloi natal yadav, since somebody else now who has unwashed hands just came and touched your wet hands, tzarich lenagev v'lachzav v'lital karoi. You need to dry your hands and you need to start all over again. Ice cut memvav. The Mechaber said al yedei hamayim. This is because your hands were still wet. Says the Mishnah, what the Mechaber wants to say is shamayim nitmu minigi yasai. Because what's happening over here is that fellow who's touching your hand is being mitame the water on your hand, or mitame yadayim, and then that water is being mitame your hands, and it's tumah haba mimakam acher, and you can't go ahead and just wash them over again. Even pouring 10 gallons of water is not going to help. You need to dry the hands first. Now, following the same math, let me ask you a very interesting question. Let's say what happens is like this. Let's say you're at a chasana. So you go ahead and you wash the Netillas Yadayim. You wash a beautiful Netillas Yadayim. Mayim Yishayim, Mayim Shneim, Mayim Yishayim, Mayim Shneim. You used 6 reviusin. You washed with plenty of water. You did niguv. You already dried your hands. Siyadayim Kodesh. You went ahead and you made a beautiful bracha. You sat down. You made a moitzi. You're in the middle of your meal. Okay. You're in the middle of your meal and you want a cold drink. So you took some ice. You put some ice in your cup. And now your hands are wet. Now somebody comes along who just walked into the chasana. And he didn't wash the Netillas Yadayim. And he comes over to you and he says, Shalom Aleichem. And you shake his hands. So what just happened? You have wet hands. And you just touched the hands of somebody who has unwashed hands. So isn't that exactly the case that we just analyzed? Now, it's not exactly the case. In the case that we just analyzed, why are your hands still wet? Your hands are wet from the Netillas Yadayim. You washed Mayim Yishayim, Mayim Shtiyim, Mayim Yishayim, Mayim Shtiyim. You didn't dry your hands yet. Now, before you dried your hands, Yankel came and he touched your hands, Shalom Aleichem. So we say you need to dry your hands and you need to start all over again. But why? Because your hands are wet. Yankel, who has unwashed hands, touched your wet hands. He transferred tumah onto the water on your hands. The water on your hands transferred tumah to your hands. You need to dry your hands and wash Netillas Yadayim over again. So how about my case? You washed, you made it on Netillas Yadayim, you made a hamoitzi. It's 15 minutes later. Yankel just came into the chasana. He didn't wash the Netillas Yadayim. And he says Shalom Aleichem to you. and he touches your wet hands. Why don't we say, or maybe we do say, I mean, according to the math, right, we should say, I would think, that Yankel, his unwashed hands, transfer tumah to your wet hands, and now you should have to dry the hands and go wash the Netillas Yadayim all over again. That's what the math would dictate. But take a look in the Dirshu. Take a look at Dirshu footnote number 34. They write over here, Achein. However, in be'emtza ha'suda, if in the middle of the meal, noga acher shaloi notal b'mashkim shebiyadav, somebody with unwashed hands comes and touches your wet hands, kasav ha'chazanish, the chazanish writes, she'ein tzarich netila acheres. You do not need to go wash the Netillas Yadayim again. Shaloi nemra halakha zu, because this halakha was only said, elikishetime yadav b'shas hanetila. This is only a problem b'shas hanetila. It's only a problem when your hands are wet from Netillas Yadayim, when you're still in the middle of being oisik b'netila. Now you say, wait a second. In the Shulchan Aruch's case, I already finished the Netillas Yadayim. No, you didn't. Since you didn't dry your hands yet, right now it's considered that you're still in the middle of the Netillas Yadayim because you didn't dry your hands yet. But once you dry your hands, and not only did you dry your hands, you already dried your hands, you already made the bracha, you already made a moitzi, you're not oisik b'Netillas Yadayim anymore. Now we don't say that if a person with unwashed hands comes and touches your wet hands, he transfers tumah to the water on your hands. Now, I'm not going to explain right now why that is. Really, the reason of the why is a little bit beyond the scope of what we do here, but I think I might have to mention it a little bit later in the shiur. So let's see as we go. Okay. Now let's go weiter in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, second line down, near the end of the line. Lakach. For this reason, tzarich lizaher, we have to take great care, k'sheshoifich mayim shlishiyim, when we wash with the third pour of water. And right away the Mechaber reminds you what he means when he says mayim shlishiyim. Shehem shniyim levad me'arishonim. He means what we call mayim shniyim. Let's remember, the Mechaber sometimes calls the mayim shniyim mayim shlishiyim, because he says that sometimes we need a first pour on our hands to clear chatzitzis off of our hands. And that doesn't count in the count of mayim rishonim and mayim shlishiyim, mayim shniyim, because that's not really part of the Netillas Yadayim. It's not really part and parcel of the Netillas Yadayim. So when the Mechaber says over here that we have to be careful when we wash mayim shlishiyim, he means what we call mayim shniyim. So, again, says the Mechaber, Lakach, therefore, tzarich lizar, we have to be careful. When we are washing mayim shniyim, we have to be very careful that one hand should not touch the other hand until after we pour mayim shniyim on the second hand as well, or we manage to wash both of our hands with one revius in one shot. So what is he just saying? He's really just tying up this whole sif. What he's telling you is, because of this great concern of transferring tumah from one hand to the other, which creates this huge problem of tumah haba mimakam acher, which requires niguv, it requires drying the hands and starting all over again, we have to be very careful. When we're washing mayim shniyim, make sure not to touch the two hands together until after you have washed mayim shniyim on both hands. Or, if you washed with one revius on both hands at one shot, then you have no concern. Then you can touch the hands together. And he concludes the sif by saying, V'im not al kol yad me revius, ein tzarich l'chol zeh. If you wash both hands with the revius, then after you finish the washing, after you washed both hands with the revius, you don't need mayim shniyim, You don't have to be careful not to touch one hand to the other because there's no tumah left. All the tumah is gone. Okay, now let's take a look here at some interesting Mishnah Berurahs. First, Mishnah Berurah Ois Kat Mem Zayin. The Mechaber used this term that is strange to us, Maim Shlishiyim. What does he mean? So the Mishnah Berurah just explains. He speaks out. The Mechaber himself explained it. Shehem Shniyim. He really means what we call the Mayim Shniyim. Explains to Mishnah Berurah what I spoke out. Shaharishonim, because the first pour that the Mechaber speaks about, Boyim Rak Lahasar Alichluch, is only to take off dirt. Kanal B'Sif Beis. So that's why he's calling he mentions Mayim Shlishiyim, third water, but he really means what we call the Mayim Shniyim, the second water. Until after you wash Mayim Shniyim on both hands, you have to be careful that one hand should not touch the other. Because the other hand, the second hand, if that hand only has Mayim Rishonim on it, that Mayim Rishonim is Tamei, Umetamin is Yadayim Rishona, and it would transfer tumah to the first hand. So again, if you washed Mayim Rishonim and then Mayim Shniyim on the first hand, and then you washed Mayim Rishonim on the second hand, you cannot touch the second hand to the first hand. To do so would be to transfer left hand tumah to the right hand, and now you would have a big problem. You would have to start over again. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, a very fascinating thing. Ubediyevet, im naga, b'diyevet, if you did do this, b'diyevet, if the left hand touched the right hand after Mayim Rishonim, but before Mayim Shniyim, yesh oimrim she'ein tzarech lenagva. There are those that say that you do not have to dry the right hand. Rak noisen akakach mayim aleh pamachas, and you could get away with pouring water on it one time. Now this is shocking. This is shocking. This runs against everything that we've discussed until now. Again, I'm sorry to be so repetitive, but I feel like I need to. Again, what happened over here? You washed Mayim Rishonim and then Mayim Shniyim on the right hand. Then you washed Mayim Rishonim on the left hand. So what do you have right now? You have a fully tahar right hand, and the water on the right hand is completely tar. You have on the left hand, the hand is tar, but it has Mayim Rishonim on it that are tamei. Now you went ahead and you touched it to the right hand. Oh boy. Oh boy. When you touched it to the right hand, what did you do? You transferred Mayim Rishonim Tameim from the left hand onto the right hand. So l'chayra, based on everything we've said until now, you just transferred left hand tumah onto the right hand. Now what are you going to do? We said, even if you pour 10 gallons of water onto the right hand, you can't be matar it because it's got left hand tumah on it. So what do you got to do? You got to dry it. Yet, the Mishnah Berurah just brought down a Yesh Omrim, and he brings this down. It's a Magen Avram in the name of the Am Shel Shlomo. He brings over here a Yesh Omrim that b'di'evid you do not have to dry the right hand, and instead you only have to pour water on it once, and that will solve the problem. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Tekevon shekvar hayu tahirim legamri, since the right hand and the water that's on it was already completely tahar, even though now tumah is being transferred to it from the other hand, mahani mayim shniyim litaram, mayim shniyim could be matar the right hand. I believe that the explanation over here of this Yesh Omrim is, since you already completed Netillas Yadayim on the right hand, to the extent that the hand is tamei and the mayim is tahar, and the water that's on it is also tahar, because you did mayim rishonim and mayim shniyim, Netillas Yadayim on this hand is finished. You're no longer being Isaac in Netillas Yadayim on this hand. Now, you're transferring tumah from a different hand? That's shvach. That's kind of similar to when you said Shalom Aleichem to Yankel in the middle of the Suda. You're not being Isaac in Netillas Yadayim anymore. Once you're not being Isaac in Netillas Yadayim anymore, we don't transfer tumah from one hand to the next. And so too over here, it could be that that's pshat in this yesh omer. There's another pshat that they bring down. Another pshat that's brought down is that this whole issue that mayim shneim can't be matar mayim rishonim, that if tumah mimokam acher, is only when the mayim that's on your hand has a double dose of tumah. What do I mean? Well, let's go back to the Mechaber's original case of Sif Daled. In the Mechaber's original case of Sif Daled, what happened was you washed mayim rishonim on your right hand, then you took your right hand and you touched your left hand. Now, in that case, the mayim rishonim that's on your right hand has a double dose of tumah. It has tumah that came from the right hand. It's mayim rishonim. Mayim rishonim took the tumah off the right hand, but the tumah is in the mayim. So the mayim rishonim that is on the right hand has one dose of tumah from the right hand itself. It picked up tumah from the right hand. And now that you touched it to the left hand, it got a second dose of tumah from the left hand. In that case, even if you pour 10 gallons of water on the right hand, you can't be matar it, you need to dry it. So too the left hand. The left hand also has a double dose of tumah. Why? Well, it has a single dose of tumah because it's an unwashed hand. Stam Yadayim, the shniyos. So it's got one dose of tumah. And now that you touched it from the right hand, it got right hand tumah from the mayim rishonim of the right hand. So in that case of the Shulchan Aruch, both hands have a double dose of tumah. When you have a double dose of tumah, even if you pour 10 gallons of water, it cannot remove the tumah. But in the case that the Mishnah Berurah is discussing over here, that's not true. In this case, what happened was you poured mayim rishonim and mayim shneim on your right hand. Now there's no tumah on the right hand at all. If you go ahead now and you touch it to the left hand, or you touch it to the left hand after you already washed even mayim rishonim on the left hand, yes, it's going to pick up tumah from the left hand, but it doesn't have a double dose of tumah. It only has a single dose of tumah. It has left hand tumah, but it has no right hand tumah, so it's a single dose of tumah. When you have a single dose of tumah, you could be matar it with a pour of water. That could be a pshat in this yesh omer. And that would fit into what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. Because look at what the Mishnah Berurah says. Yesh omrim she'ein tzarich l'nagva. There are those that say that you don't have to dry the right hand. Rak noisen hakach mayim alei pamachas. All you have to do is pour water on it once. Why? Dekevan shekfar hayu tahirim legamri. Because since the right hand itself was completely tar, and the water that's on it is completely tar, afa pishin nitmu umiyado acheres, even though now it's picking up tumah from the second hand, mahani mayim ashniyim l'taram. The mayim shniyim that you'll pour onto it now will be matarit. Why? Because it only has one dose of tumah. Because the hand itself and the mayim on the hand itself were completely tar. It's only getting tumah now from the left hand. It's a single dose of tumah. So now if you pour more water on it, it can be matarit. Aber, the Mishnah Berurah says, but there are others that disagree with this and say more in line with what we were saying until now, that you have to dry the hand and you need to do over. Ois cotton mem tes, the Mechaber said that if you wash each hand with a full revius, then einay tzarich l'chol zeh, that you don't need all of this. If you wash each hand with a full revius, so then there's no tumah, not in the hand, not in the water. And once you finish washing both hands, you pour a revius on the right hand and then a revius on the left hand. You don't need mayim shneim me'ikar adin. It's okay if you touch the hands together because there's no tumah. Says the Mishnah Berurah memtes einay tzarich l'chol zeh. What the Mechaber wants to say is, like the Mechaber said earlier, they ain't tzarich mayim shneim. You don't need mayim shniyim, umotutekef l'shavshe from zebazeh, and you could touch the hands together. Aval mikam akum, but nevertheless, says the Mishnah Berurah, yesh lizar, we have to be careful. Shaloi liga behem acher, shaloi natal yadav. Be careful. The Mechaber says, ain't tzarich l'chol zeh. But there is a halacha that he said over here in Sif Daled that still is negeya, even if you wash each hand with a revius. And that is, what if you wash the right hand with a revius, the left hand with a revius, and your hands are wet, and now your uncle wants to come say Shalom Aleichem? Your uncle's hands are tumah. They're unwashed hands. If he touches your hands while they're still wet, even though you washed with a full revius, he's going to transfer tumah to your hands. You'll have to dry your hands and start all over again. That's the same as if you wash mayim rishonim and mayim shniyim on both hands and your uncle touches your hands. That was the Mechaber's case. Your hands are completely tar. The water on your hands are completely tar. But since they're still wet from the Netillas Yadayim water, your uncle could transfer tumah to the water on your hands from his unwashed hands. So says the Mishnah Berurah, when the Mechaber says, Ein tzarich l'chol zeh, but that halach is still nageya. Because of a chayadam, the chayadam writes, to become akim. And again, here we're splitting hairs. Because of a chayadam, to become akim nevertheless. Im kfar birich al Netillas Yadayim. Let's say, you buy the chasana. You washed mayim rishonim, mayim shniyim, mayim rishonim, mayim shniyim. Your right hand, your left hand, they're completely tar. The water that's on them is completely tar. And now you went ahead and you made the bracha al Netillas Yadayim, but you didn't finish drying your hands. Now your uncle, he hasn't seen you in 6 years. He comes running over to you and he says, Shalom Aleichem. So he touched your hands, your wet hands, that are wet from the Netillas Yadayim water, with his unwashed hands. So l'chayra, you need to dry your hands and wash over again. And I would think you have to make a bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Chayyadam says not so fast. The cause of a Chayyadam to become akim in kvar birich on the Netillas Yadayim. If you already washed the Netillas Yadayim, v'nizkar, and now you realize that somebody touched your hands, yachzor v'yital yadav, yes, you should wash again, v'lo yivarech. But you should not make a bracha of al Netillas Yadayim. Now, why is that? So, one possible reason over here is, there is a shita that holds that if you wash your hand with a revius of mayim, then once you do the washing, the mayim cannot be makabel tumah from somebody else's hands. Let's remember, we've said this as a fact already for the last several days. When you wash your hands with a full revius, right, the tumah vanishes. When you wash with less than a revius, the tumah goes from your hand into the water. But when you wash with the revius, the tumah vanishes. You could extrapolate, or you could extend that svara and say that if you wash your hand with the revius, the same way that the mayim on your hand isn't makabel tumah from your hand, it's possible that it's also not makabel tumah from somebody else's hands. And therefore, says the Chayyadam, b'diavad, don't make another bracha. Okay, let's cover one more base over here and another interesting shiloh that I'll bring up. Kasva Achrayim. The Achrayim write. Now, this is a very simple case. You just, again, you got to follow the math. You know what? I wanted to grab a Netillas Yadayim cup, but I didn't. Okay, no. I think we could work without it. Kasva Achrayim. Im natal akli biyadai halecha. Let's say you pick up the Netillas Yadayim cup with your wet hand. Now, the Mishnah Berurah in the brackets explains what he means. Hainu biyad hayamin. You're picking up the Netillas Yadayim cup with your wet right hand. Now, why is your right hand wet? Sheshafach aleim mitchila pamakas biyadei asmalas. What you did over here was like this. You went to wash the Netillas Yadayim. Now, let's make it simple. Let's imagine that you're using for your Netillas Yadayim cup a cup with one handle, not the fancy ones that we have now that have two handles. You have a Netillas Yadayim cup with one handle. You went ahead, you filled up the cup, you took the cup, and you poured mayim rishonim onto your right hand. Okay? Now your right hand is wet. Now you put the cup down, and you pick up the cup with your wet right hand in order to pour on your left hand. That's the case that the Mishnah is discussing. You picked up the Netillas Yadayim cup with your wet right hand. Why is your right hand wet? You're picking it up with your right hand. You poured mayim rishonim onto your right hand from your left hand. And that's why your right hand is wet. Nitma oizen akli me'amayim sheyesh al yadai. You are now going to transfer tumah onto the handle of the cup. Why? Very simple. Based on everything we've said until now. Right? Do the math. You poured mayim rishonim onto your right hand. The mayim rishonim that are on your right hand are tameh. When you go to pick up the Netillas Yadayim cup now with your right hand, you're putting tameh mayim rishonim water onto the handle of the Netillas Yadayim cup. Now you pour mayim rishonim onto your left hand. Okay. Now you put the cup down, and you go and you pick it up with your left hand. Uh-oh. You know what you just did? You just picked up tamei mayim rishonim water from your right hand. Right? Again, the first time you picked up the cup, you picked it up with your left hand. And assumedly, your left hand was dry. So, the first time you picked up the cup, you picked it up with your dry left hand. You poured mayim rishonim onto your right hand. Now, your right hand has mayim rishonim water on it that's tamei from the right hand. Okay. Now you pick up the cup. So far, so good. You pour mayim rishonim onto your left hand. So far, so good. Now you put the cup down. Now remember, the handle of that cup has mayim rishonim on it that came from your right hand. Now you pick it up with your left hand. Oh boy. Now you have mayim rishonim water from your right hand on your left hand. You just transferred tamei mayim rishonim water from your right hand to your left hand. L'chari, you should have to dry your hands and start all over again. So, what does Mishnah Berurah say? You now make the handle of the cup tamei me'amayim sheyesh al yadai, from the mayim rishonim of your right hand. The mayim rishonim tameim hem. Ve'im chazav ha'chazai b'yadei asmalis, and now if you pick it up with your right hand, lead to pam shniya al yamin, to pour mayim shniyim on the right hand, nitma yadei al yadei zeh. Your left hand just became tamei. V'tzarich l'nagva, and you have to dry your hand, start all over again. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, eitza lozeh. What's the very simple eitzah to avoid this problem? The eitzah is what we do. V'eitzah lozeh, sheyatel revius babasakas al kol yad v'yad. First of all, when you start Netillas Yadayim, pick up the kais with your left hand, pour a full revius on the right hand. If you pull a full revius on the right hand, then there is no tamei mayim rishonim on the right hand. Or, says the Mishnah Berurah, oy, sheyishbach mayim rishonim ushniim al kol yad v'yad b'ftei atzma. Or, don't do mayim rishonim, mayim rishonim, mayim shniim. No, do mayim rishonim, mayim shniim. Now, you don't have any tamei mayim rishonim water on this hand. So now you pick up the cup, it's no problem. Mayim rishonim, mayim shniim. Also, you're not touching the cup again with your left hand. So, okay, so the Mishnah Berurah brought up the shaila, and the Mishnah Berurah gave a very, very simple eitzah of how to get away with the problem. But now, let me ask you this shaila. Let's extrapolate. And let's come up with another shaila, which I don't think is such a rare shaila. I think it's a very simple shaila. What happens if you go to wash the Netillas Yadayim and your hands are wet? Okay? You're not starting off with dry hands. You're starting off with wet hands. So you go to the sink. You pick up the Netillas Yadayim cup. Now you have unwashed hands. You pick up the Netillas Yadayim cup, and again, let's say we're dealing with a cup with one handle. You go and you pick up the cup with your wet left hand. And now you pour mayim rishonim and mayim shneim on your right hand. Wow, this is awesome. My right hand is completely tar. The mayim that's on it is completely tar. Maybe I even poured 4 reviusin on my right hand. My right hand is so tar, it's super tar. Okay. Now I put the cup down and I pick up the cup with my right hand. Oh boy. Oh boy. I just put left hand tumah onto my right hand. Why? Because the first time I touched the handle of this keli, I touched it with my wet left hand. So didn't I put tumah from my left hand onto the keli? And now when I pick it up with my right hand, I'm picking up that tumah. The answer, it seems, is that according to Moshitas, this isn't a problem. Why isn't it a problem? The reason it's not a problem is because of a halacha that we learned earlier in Siman Kuf Samach. In Siman Kuf Samach, we learned a very interesting halacha. We learned that for the Netillas Yadayim, you're not allowed to use mayim she'asa behem malacha. Any mayim that you accomplished a task with, you're not allowed to do the Netillas Yadayim with. It's possible for the Netillas Yadayim because it's considered mayim shoifchim. But we had a case. We had a case. We had a case back on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, Kuf Samech Seif Beis. We had a case where you're dealing with a baker. You're dealing with a baker. And what the baker is doing is, he's dunking his unwashed hands into a keli of water, and then he's taking his wet hands and he's rubbing the dough to glisten the dough. We said that in that case, the water that's in the keli is still kosher for the Netillas Yadayim. Why is it still kosher for the Netillas Yadayim? Because that's not called mayim shenasa behem malacha. You didn't do malacha with the water that's in the keli. You did malacha with the water that you took out of the keli. You wet your hands, and with the wetness on your hands, you glistened the dough. But you didn't glisten the dough with the water that's in the keli. So the water that's in the keli is still good for the Netillas Yadayim. Frek the Mishnah Berurah, what? But you dunked your unwashed hands into the water. So didn't you put tumah into the water? Said the Mishnah Berurah, no. No, you didn't. No, it's not a problem. Not a problem. You didn't put tumah into the water. Why not? So there are different reasons that are brought down why that's not problematic. One of the reasons that it's not problematic is because it has nothing to do with Netillas Yadayim. I'm going to use a term that I coined a few shiurim ago. The halachas of the Netillas Yadayim have no jurisdiction over that water. When a baker dunks his hand in a keli of mayim in order to wet his hands to glisten the dough, that has nothing to do with Netillas Yadayim. Memelo, the halachas of the Netillas Yadayim are not at play. And we're not going to worry about tumah coming off the hand and going into the water that's in the keli. So too over here. When you go to pick up the keli for the first time to start washing the Netillas Yadayim and your hands happen to be wet, that has nothing to do with Hilchas Netillas Yadayim. The Netillas Yadayim didn't start yet. So we're not worried yet about transference of tumah at that moment. And that is not negeya, and that won't make a problem. Okay, I hope I'm not being too repetitive. I just find that these halachas take there's a lot of paper trail over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Ramah should send Yeshua's for first parnasset shidduchim tol ozanin. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Goel Tzedek, the Gula Shlema, the Meher of Yameinu. Amen. Be well.